Good evening, welcome, thank you for coming to Proto Cinema's exhibition with Token Ergun. It's his first one-person show in the United States. And then he's going to talk today about this work and his art called Ashura from 2012 that you just saw, and his practice with Chus Martinez, who is now the chief curator at the Museo de Barrio. Welcome to you.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation, and that's going to be a quite informal talk. Listening you talking about that work, I think for the first thing is talking about using Ashura is quite interesting right now. I think for those like me, that we are coming from a Catholic country, Ashura is very similar to Semana Santa, which is just a ritual of celebrating a moment of inflection in a history of a ritual and a religion that actually marks a way of collectively celebrating a faith, but also of theatralizing a moment of importance that is different than the written one. So there is also a discrepancy between what you celebrate and what the text says. And that's on the one hand, but also Ashura marks the difference in between many other differences, but it really marks the difference in between Shia and Sunni Islam. And I think it's very important that now that everyone is talking about Islam all the time, but very few times we get an insight about this radical difference in between these two moments or these two collective ways of understanding Islam as a religion, but not only as a religion, but Islam as a practice. So the practice of Islam in between Shia and Sunni are radically different. And actually, apart from Iran, which is the only country that has a majority, if not a complete majority, apart from some other religions that are still operating, of Shia, the rest is Sunni. With 1 million, I think, in Turkey, and another million in the border or with Iraq and all that. So it's a quite interesting work that you focus on that community, which is a minority community, that in this ritual, which is a ritual of rehearsal towards a day, and that moment of empathy or strange, epitome of emotions that we saw at the end. So perhaps you can tell us why.
Why did I choose to?
Why did you choose that?
I mean, first of all, to go back many years ago, I've been seeing posters in Istanbul, in Taksim Square, not every time the same month of the year, but it would come up 1 month, and then 3 years later, another month. I wasn't used to the lunar calendar. We were using the Gregorian calendar, and these were posters with depictions of a dead horse full of blood and no human figure around it, and some shields on the floor, a desert, sepia colors, something symbolizing thirst, like a flask upside down or with like 2 drips going. It's very dramatic, and I was not an artist then, I was studying theater. And then years later I started doing works which I understood were about mass performances. And then I understood that they are actually rituals. And then I was more conscious of choosing the next step. So, for example, I did a work about National Day ceremonies in a stadium in Turkey, which is embedded in our body and culture. I did it in a way of, how can I say, exorcising the horrors of that kind of education that was given to me, and nationalism. And then I moved into wedding ceremonies because I was starting to live in Berlin, and I felt culturally detached from the society, so I wanted to reattach myself to the Turkish society. So then I found that actually they were not the culture that I got used to. There was a different culture, in-between culture, a minority, let's say, culture, but they're no longer, in that sense, a minority. They're included in the greater German society quite a lot, but they have a hybrid, for example, character of culture. And then I was in Israel, and I was dealing with a beauty pageant of the Filipino immigrants, guest workers, which was a lot of fun for me. And they were religious. They were Catholic. And I was brought up very secular, hating everything about religion. But I was interested in these aspects of religion. And then I said, what's next after the project about the Filipinos? What could be? I didn't have to do something about ritual, but I suddenly remembered those posters. And because my Filipino friends were so religious, and for us, we celebrate Christmas in Israel, which was very interesting. Religion was all over, and I said, okay, it's the time of the year probably, and it was. And I asked a friend, I was living in Berlin, I asked a friend in Istanbul, said, do you see those posters? She said, yes, this is the day, it's going to be on this day. And I went on that date to the day of Ashura, celebrated. This is the backstage, something on the back of this. This is not the first year that I went. The first year I went, I just shot it with a very simple camera, and then I was very moved by the experience, not by my shootings, but by the experience of it. So I called them up the next morning, and I said, I'm interested in knowing more about you. And then they said, come. And then we started meeting regularly, one more year.
Do they consider themselves like an amateur theater group?
Yes,
Yeah.
they would like to be seen as an amateur theater group called, from the neighborhood, it's called Zeynepia, so they are called the Zeynepia Theater Company. But they don't really even work like an amateur theater group. They are very disorganized in some sense. So they only put on a play 2 times of the year. The day of Ashura, which is actually next week in the lunar calendar, and Newroz, which is New Year's in that part of the world, Iran, south of ex-Soviet
I mean
states.
Newroz.
Newroz, yeah, also in the Kurdish tradition. Apart from those, they don't do any theater. So they only do the theater for this reason. But they call themselves a theater company. They want to be called like that.
Yeah, because I think they normally, that you rehearse for a year, and then normally everyone takes a character and the characters are stable. So you normally don't, the main figure stays the main figure for years.
For years,
on.
yeah.
Is this the same case
Yeah.
here?
It's almost the same case. You were giving the example of the Catholic.
Yeah, but also
Recreation.
in Ashura in Iran, I think it's a very honorable role to take.
To take Hussein. Like
Yeah, to take Hussein and
was
then the
Hussein.
person, exactly.
he was the evil guy, killing him. He had problems in the neighborhood because of being the evil guy. Nobody would sell him anything. And he is one of my closest friends in that neighborhood. And he had a lot of psychological pressure on him. Like his children were having big problems because they were like pushed at school sometimes. That not in a very bad way, but they were saying, hey, your father is Yazid, like he always plays Yazid. So he was asking the director one year to change
But it's
his
normal,
role.
I think, if you play Virgin Mary in Christmas in Catholic countries, you also have better chances to marry better.
Probably.
It's the same situation.
What's interesting that happened in this neighborhood was, first of all, in Iran, the real culture of this theater play, if you look behind of you now, this is the theater play. It's called Taziye. It's related with the word elegy and mourning. This play in Iran is made by companies which travel all around the country, pretty much like how Shakespeare used to work with a company. Taziye has arenas in Iran, so professional actors play the Taziye. You pay money to get in, and you pay money to cry. For example, at some times, Hussein comes on his horse, the main character, Imam Hussein, the prophet, and when he's being killed, beheaded, the officers come with a head and go in front of the people with their head and ask them to pay. And they're really crying, they're really like in a trance, and they pay. In many cases, these actors are as famous as sumo wrestlers, or as famous as Hollywood or Bollywood actors. So people also throw themselves to their feet erotically in a way. And it is also sometimes seen that they use a lot of drugs on stage to be, driven. Okay, the story in Turkey is completely different. They are an amateur group. They don't employ anybody professional from the outside. There is no money involved, and some of them have to play the evil characters. And if they're playing the evil character, the main part of their ritual is to cry that day. But what happens if you're the man who is the army of the evil? How do you cry? So they devise the way when they're on stage. They go and kill one officer of Imam Hussein. They go back to the chorus. They call it the chorus, just like the National Greek Theatre. They go back to the chorus, tell 3 friends to do this in front of them, and they go behind and they cry. And they go back again on stage, yeah, like this. They do. One year, they employed a very handsome man, an actor, looking like Imam Hussein. Really, like, we saw him on the street. He looked something like Jesus and Imam Hussein, and everybody was like this. But everybody, in the thousands of people in the mass audience, they felt that he didn't feel it as emotionally as the people. First of all, he was not a Shia. He was playing, he was acting, he was a professional. The whole energy broke. It was the worst year of Ashura that year.
Mm-hmm.
People were extra crying. They're saying, like, this cannot be saying. They were crying more for that as well. After that year, they decided never ever to employ a professional person again. And once they asked me to direct it, and I said absolutely no. And then they didn't ask me again. The day of Ashura, which is not included in this work that you see here, is this theater group. Well, they're rehearsing now. They will be on stage in a giant space, which was until last year the only, as far as I know, sacred spot in Istanbul, which was only used twice a year, in Nevruz and in Ashura. And never would be allowed even to park cars on that empty area, which is a populated area. And they put on the stage play there. It's live on TV, on some channels. And hundreds of thousands of people come, and they see the play and they cry in public. But here, what you see at the end of this work, in the left screen and in the right screen, the Imam, this is the night following the day of Ashura, where the public has gone to their homes, but this is the most emotionally charged ritual, especially for the man, when they do the finalization of the day. And this is when they sometimes...
That's when we see them
that's
crying.
when we see them crying.
So it's a male ceremony, that's a closure ceremony, that's actually kind of closing up the theater or the year. So it's the end of that, it's the end of the season, like the opera season.
Exactly.
That it finished, and they are crying not because of what he's saying, but they are crying because it's just another day, another year of accomplishment, and then they have in front of them the year that comes.
It's true. It's not only, it's also an accomplishment, like to cry from joy, especially. I agree with that, because they asked me to come and join a lot of times, but because I was shooting, I couldn't. But one year I did, without any recording material, and they knew me, but they never saw me participating in their rituals, because I was usually the artist holding the camera. And a person was sitting next to me, a grandfather with his grandson, and obviously the grandson was a bit bored when the Imam was speaking before everybody started crying. So he has to speak a bit, and then there's one point where he says one word and everybody cries. And the boy was obviously bored, and he said to his granddad, let's go home. And he said, very simply, he says, let's cry a bit and we go. And it was very, very casual, and 2 minutes later I heard somebody behind me sobbing, and then it was contagious, contagious, contagious. Everybody around me was sobbing, and I also fell into tears. And then they got up and said a prayer, beating their chest like in the beginning, which I also joined in. And that was over. Suddenly the Imam disappeared for some reason. He just like disappeared, vanished from sight. And it was very done. And then they would come and tap on my shoulder and say, okay, let's have some drinks. Which is tea, of course. It wasn't alcoholic. But the transformation, yeah, I mean, in the public. But transformation was very interesting. So being religious, they say that we are every day, but you realize that it's just like quickly can turn. I mean, it's your practice at that moment, and then you quickly go out of it immediately. So you weep 10 minutes, and then you smile immediately 1 minute after.
Well, but this is exactly the difference in between Shia and Sunni, meaning that the ritual, which is normally a very radical one. In Iran, people go on the streets and there is like this professional whippers that is amazing. It's all about pain and blood and so on. It looks very spectacular, but it's actually almost no pain involved. But the performance of pain, a collective performance of pain, helps then also to even, or it was a way of equalizing, if somebody could say something like that, the relationship in between the everyday life and fundamentalism. So to escape fundamentalism, you need to ritualize certain radical moments of that religion.
And periodically you have to repeat.
Yeah, so that was exactly what, for example, certain Catholic rituals and certain Shia rituals are very, very similar. So are completely symmetric in the way they act. But what does this work tell us about the process that Turkey is undergoing today?
At the moment, it was happened before Gezi, that the work was shot before Gezi, but I'm in touch with them on Facebook. The Shiite groups in Turkey are not supporting Erdogan because Erdogan is a Sunni. And they are very skeptical about the war in Syria.
Explain for the audience, and probably they know, but what if they don't know?
Erdogan is the Prime Minister of Turkey, who is a Sunni. Turkey is traditionally a Sunni empire, leftover of an Ottoman Empire, which was a Sunni powerhouse.
But it's a secular country.
It became a secular nation state, looking to the West, not looking to just down here, basically. Would be what I would say. Looking really far west and denying a lot of their own cultural standing point. And throughout the years, all the elite was actually running Turkey by way of elections or not by way of elections, usually continuing the agenda of the modernized, secular, but always Sunni, always Sunni.
But also you need to explain that there has been Ataturk that was having this process of modernizing the country by making it completely secular, and actually it's the only country in the Middle East, but probably the history of Western cultures as well, if you could consider such a thing, that every time that there was a danger of fundamentalism coming from the side of religion, it was a coup d'etat made by the army. So the army, instead of being perceived only as a power or an oppressive weapon, has been strangely perceived as a regulative principle that would save the country for falling into the arms of religion. That's why I'm asking what is this kind of filming and this kind of reflecting on religion telling us about the transformation of Turkey today?
First of all, it's true what you say, that the usual agenda behind the army is taking over. Just like when a child is being fooled, the mother says, "It's okay, I saved you from the witches." The witches in this case was always Islam, or anything related to Islam. Level A, level B, level C. Or communism, in that sense. So both of these were unwanted by the army. Although we found out recently, throughout the corruption cases, that the army has actually a love story with the Soviet style of rule, let's say. But majority would be against the religious agenda. And then 1998, Tayyip Erdogan is elected by a majority, which was quite a fresh move. They were not denouncing their cultural roots, but they also embraced liberal economy, and they questioned secularism even from the beginning. But because they were such a majority after so many coalitions, people really embraced them, a lot of people. Whereas on the other side, there would be always the same group of Republicans which would support the army. The Republicans in Turkey is very similar to the Republicans here, I would say. Or the Republicans in Turkey, which is called the Social Democrats, are similar to the right parties in Europe, mostly. They are anti-European Union, they are anti-Kurdish right, they are anti-LGBT rights, they are anti-different modes of speech. But Tayyip Erdogan was a new formation, and he came with a lot of hope, but something happened in the way that 3-4 times in the power, he became completely corrupt in his own he got high on his own stuff, as they say. You know, he has all that drugs in his hand and he took them all. But that's a very long story. Anyway, to cut it short, he still remains a Sunni, and he wanted to go back to the Ottoman rule of at least the borders. So it was very logical to say, we no longer want to flirt with the European Union, and they were crashing, so why don't we make a Balkan, Middle Eastern, let's not say Middle Eastern, East Mediterranean, and North Black Sea, Crimea, and some of the islands in the area. So basically that is the Ottoman borders when they were really, really high. So, but what was happening there was like Ottoman rule was a Sunni rule, and they did a lot of torture to a lot of Shiites in their territories. And there's one thing that we all should know in history: you don't touch Iran. You don't touch Iran. Iran and Ottoman Empire's borders was the same for 400 years without any regulations. And that was the thing: Sunni on one side and Shiite on that side. So traditionally, the Shiite community in Turkey was always in the shadows. They were always in the shadows. And there are two levels of Shiite in Turkey. One is these Shiites, which are closer to Iran, and the other is a Shiite, a mixture, Alevi, which is a mixture of shamanism and ancient Greek traditions a little bit, which my family comes from, one part. They are also Shiite, so they also had a lot of problems with the Sunni. So now when Syria is being invaded, I should say, being invaded by the forces, America, European Union, of course Israel is always there on that side, and Turkey, this is a Sunni agenda on the side of Turkey. So they would like to replace Bashar al-Assad because he's not a Sunni. So the agenda would be to have a Sunni empire, because culturally they would be close to each other. Where do they stand? Now, funny enough, they're voting for the fascist party in Turkey. Because they come from Azerbaijan, and next to Azerbaijan there's Armenia. And they had a fight with them. So just because of the Armenian thing, there's one thing that you cannot talk with the Jafiri community in Turkey, is that Armenian problem. For that reason, they chose to vote for the last 3 elections to the fascist party, Turkish nationalists.
As a lobby.
Yes. And they have one parliament member from this neighborhood who is in that party, in the parliament.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if that answers your question, but and also my personal part in this is I have been more allergic to hardcore secularism than radical Muslim movements.
You have been in means over the years?
Yes.
Yeah.
Since I realized myself, I was very furious. I considered it as a rape against many people and against also myself that I have almost been taken away from many parts of my culture. Just because of this witch, the mother would say, like, don't look at the witch. The witch was always any kind of religion, And I was brought up with images of Jesus all over. I traveled in the Middle East, had a lot of interaction with the Jewish people, which I really like the culture. So it fits into my time when I'm rediscovering about these things that have not been given to me by way of education, either at school or at home.
Well, I think there's not by chance many Iranians compare the situation after the Shah and this kind of recuperating tradition as a vernacularism or as a way of getting in touch with aspects of your own culture, and the Turkey turn into religion as well. So, and it's actually kind of funny sometimes to listen to Iranians saying, but there is no solution in that direction either. So that this is not a language. This is not a political language. That's a cultural language, and the question is to confuse a cultural language with a political language. And therefore, I think it's interesting that you choose something which is actually a pure theater play, which says a lot and says nothing at the same time, because it's always a fiction.
I agree what you say. I mean, the general thing also I always try to tell people is that please don't look at anything about religion as a power thing or a political, let's say, thing. Let's use the word thing. Look at it as a cultural thing. There are something that you cannot avoid if you're born into that culture. If somebody comes and snatches away your favorite part of your body, you feel very naked. And this is what happened by way of radical secularism in my country.
And now that we talk a lot about culture, Can you tell us about the technical, like the syntaxis of the work? I think how did you produce it? There is 3 screens. I think there's actually an understanding of it encompasses you as a viewer. It really replicates somehow this idea of totalizing, being part of, being in the middle of, and all that. But how did you proceed with it? You said that you shoot it for almost 3 years. You have been in touch with this community?
I've been in touch. It included until the point of this is completion. I think it was almost 3 years, because the first year I just made some introductions to myself, visual introductions by taking pictures, but never used them. Didn't even look at them. The first year of Ashura, and then we worked together for 1 year. I was in touch with them. I wanted to help them, also videotaping the events for themselves, because they had always this bad DVD published after their performance, and it's so bad because like the people.
Now they are very happy.
But they didn't want to use this because it was too confusing for them with all the editing, because it was easy for them. The TV is making it live, so the TV board comes and somebody who does nothing about the theater that is being played presses the button just like they are following a football match. So, you know, this camera is like going in, going out, but this guy's dying here and the camera is shooting a woman doing this, for example. So I was like trying to help them. I said, I can't have my cameras. I can give you all the footage, which I did at the end. They have all of my footage in that year. So they invited me and to come and to be present in the rehearsals, and they started 1 month before the Muharram, before Ashura. In those 1 month, the first 20 days, I had a camera with me, but I never took it out. I was watching the things in this mosque, in this very mosque, and that's why I put the carpet, because it reminds me of my days there, where we sit on the carpet, and they would bring tea, we would drink, we would socialize, men and women together on the same floor of the mosque, and they would rehearse, and 10 days towards the day, I started shooting.
And how did the camera affect them? Meaning you have been in touch with them, you have been like a member and a non-member of the community, and then one day you take the camera, so I'm sure that they try to impress you in a certain way. The camera has always this effect of performing for the camera. Did you notice that?
Yes, and you also see as an audience on the left screen when my camera is going, let's say, backstage between the actors. Some of them who like, I mean, they all know me, and they were actually insisting on me shooting them. But I couldn't really go to every corner of the mosque, because they were saying like, this is my scene, please shoot me. But it wasn't only in the scene. They also wanted me, I was really literally taken from this hand and this hand at the end of every rehearsal to go to one house for dinner. It was impossible for me to partition myself. That is why it lasted more than 1 year, because after the shooting I went back to the neighborhood just to have dinner with the people who I couldn't have dinner. They had no shyness about camera, and they thought I shot less, I should have shot more.
But did they thought that the camera altered somehow the kind of emotionality of the performance? They thought that this year, or when you were shooting, the camera was adding, or it was kind of epitomizing more emotions than without you there? I think, were they performing for you?
Sometimes, yes. Sometimes the boys would do more, but the more experienced people, the elder, wouldn't change their performance for me, but the younger would sometimes push each other to get into my camera.
So that's great. Perhaps there is somebody in the audience that wants to ask something.
Yes.
Can you tell us the importance of this photograph here? Like,
okay.
why did you decide to include it in China?
Okay, this was the day of Ashura, exactly, the one that was not included in the work. This is the backstage, and behind is a massive group of people crying at that moment. And they're waiting for their turn to go on and make this play. And they pulled me. They said, we need a picture, a memory. Yeah. So we were all sleepless, because the night before this, there's also a lot of rituals. So not so many people sleep at that time. So we all have puffy faces in this photograph. And a lot of cigarettes and tea, caffeine. And it's obvious that I'm shooting with a camera, and I have a badge saying technical crew. I have made other projects where I have worked closely with the community in that as a subject, And I always want to include somehow, either in the display of the exhibition or somehow in the text about it, them, the people, but not the way they appear in the film, but backstage or in their normal, ordinary costumes or something. And they are my friends. So I want them to be here. So this is one of the reasons I want that to happen. Also, I always also ask myself the question, where is the artist in the work sometimes, you know? So that was for me quite an obvious thing, to just put the artist here in there and, you know, surrounded by a group of people, but not alone himself as the artist. You know.
Did you show the work in Turkey?
This, not as an installation, it is now shown in film festivals, because there's a version of it which is a single channel, which is shown in film festivals. But we had a special screening at the neighborhood.
But you do expect to show it in Turkey as well?
As an installation, I'd love to. Yeah.
Do you expect the reception of the work being very different between the general audience in Turkey and abroad?
Apparently, I've attended one screening in Istanbul, and in one I wasn't here, but Mary was there. I'm not expecting differences, because as let's say you are foreigners to whatever you're seeing on this screen, I bet you 100% the majority of Turkish people are so equally foreigner to this, what they're seeing. Nobody even knows that there is something like Jaferi Shiites in that country, not even the city.
What does Ashura stand for, the word?
It's 10th, the 10th day of the month. And it's also a mourning for the Imam Hussein who died. So, but practically it says the 10th of the month of mourning.
I just want to ask you something about the neighborhood and kind of fraternal aspect of the troupe. Is there only one troupe, and is that a result of the limited size of the community? Or is it, you know, when you hear of these neighborhood troupes or almost competitions like the Palio or in Carnival in Rio, where groups get together and show their neighborhood pride, that's not reflected in different troupes? It's just a singular band?
I understand, but it's not the case, I think, like the examples of Brazil, because they are all together in one neighborhood, so there's only a place for one troupe. They are not rival troupes. But they do criticize the Iranian way of taziyeh, which is the professional way of really taking.
But in Iran it's like that.
In Iran it is like that.
It is, so,
Yes,
so
yes.
there is kind of this territorial aspect to
It's
it.
it's the
Yes.
Olympics
Yeah.
of
Yes.
street theater, and people compete, and there is like cities that are better than others, and moments, and actors, and dresses, and crying, and blood, and every element, and it's, you know, and it's very, very difficult even to have a space in the street to attend it. It's like Semana Santa in Sevilla that cost a fortune, because you
have to pay for it.
You need to pay for the balconies, you need to pay for the street, because to be in the first line makes such a difference. And that's really, everyone talks about this idea of the transformative, blah, blah, blah. So it's blah, 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 it's experience. You know, it's in Iran, it's really like that. There is an economy that's an economy of that spectacle.
It's true, but they say, for example, the Jaferi community in Zainabia says they're always very smiling because Iran is the godfather. But they say it's different here. Yeah. It's different here.
So
that's
there's a certain
they know it.
Local pride.
Yeah. And there is a certain to Iran, you know.
I wanted to. I mean, you spoke a little bit about it, but I wanted to come back to something you referred to several times, is your position towards the ritual theater that you film, in terms of if you bridge kind of possibility of documentary filmmaking, the illusion that the filmmaker is completely separated from what he's interested in, to the other radical position, for example, Maya Deren's, you can't even film if you're really interested, you can only practice. So thereby you have to give up your artistic tools. So within that, how would you position yourself as the position of the artist towards those amateur theater people that you're interested in?
It's still in the making. I'm practicing it as we go, I'm experiencing it, I'm aware of those discussions. But I also believe that there's a lot of personal levels involved in this. And don't agree that you should completely leave your camera, because they would be very unhappy if I did that. So then, shouldn't I listen to them, for example? Some in my Filipino experience in Tel Aviv, the girls would be very, very angry with me if they didn't see themselves end up in the picture after spending 1 year with me. They wouldn't speak to me, but just because of that. So they would want to be, for example, they want to have me work as a cameraman, as a person who shoots them, you know, for example.
It's like in the photo call.
Yeah.
But I think that not to be misunderstood, I think as far as I
No, I
understood
understood.
the argument of Maya Deren, it's not so much whether they, in this case in Haiti, would have accepted or liked or whatever to appear in image.
Yeah, Haiti
But
is also
realizing that her actually interest in the ritual of voodoo in that case can only be verified by not filming but by practicing.
That's
That
right.
there is
That's
kind of-
correct.
That is kind of that the tool that she came with is a useless tool to actually experience.
It is correct. I totally agree. But again, as I said, the levels of information here are different. That is voodoo. That's Haiti. Black, white. Here, I'm in the same culture, but in a different neighborhood. We have similarities. It would be very rude not to be friends with them, very close. And it will also equally be rude when I'm friends with them, not to shoot it, make into it work. And this is why I am, at this moment, my only discomfort at this talk, I'm very comfortable about it, is that I didn't ask anybody to take a picture when everybody is sitting on the carpet and watching the work. That's the first thing I will do, because it's going to go on Facebook immediately tonight. Share it, tag the names of these people. You know, because I want to include them in the experience, because it was really, really, for me, a big honor to show it all around the world. Yes, there's my name on it, of course, as well. But for example, in the one-screen version of this, it ends with a dedication to the people of the Zainabia neighborhood. So,
But also the cultural and the social function are radically different.
yeah,
Meaning in voodoo is all about conveying a certain force that only the ritual can give to that community, and therefore there is no distance. But here is an amateur group that, of course, is meeting together as a kind of brotherhood, as a kind of community, holding each other upon the platform of that common belief or a common culture. So it's not about conveying any force.
No.
It's only about being together and honoring that day in the best possible way. I think that's a radical difference. Therefore, they allow, I feel like in theater, then you can allow the viewer.
and there's a wish from the community to be known better and more. I've been called to the Imam a month ago, and he said, please come for a tea. And I went, and I was quite like, he has a presence. You could be like this. And he said he's seen the film 3 times at home. Of course, he doesn't want to be in public so much. And he said, you will be protected a lot by the gods. And he used the gods. It's very interesting how he said that, because there's only one God in this belief. He said the gods. And he said, we are very happy. First thing is that not because it's a good film or something, we're very happy that you're showing it to the outside, you're showing us to the outside. So they would have been quite unhappy with me if I didn't do this, for example, into an artwork. It's interesting. You know, I know, I'm very aware of I'm really discussing this all the time with other ethnographers as well, how they see. And I think it's each case is different. Like each person is different.
I just wanted to see if I understand something you said earlier, which was, I guess, a suggestion that there was a sort of inauthenticity to the crying ritual that once enacted actually became authentic. Like once the ritual began, there was a kind of contagion and it became real to some people. And also, I don't know if that's what you were saying. And then you also said, if I understand, that you were raised, in a secular manner, but that now you've embraced this.
No, I'm still from the secular culture more, but I'm more open. My antennas are more open than before, because my antennas were cut and put in a drawer. Now I put them on, and discovering things without prejudices.
But it's still functioning as a curiosity. You know, as an interest.
I do my own practice myself as well. Yeah, I can say I'm a believer. But not only this religion, many religions. And to your first question is that it's not only because they are told to cry. You can see right behind you now they're crying. It is really from the heart and contagious and choreographed by the imam. He knows how to make people cry. He says one sentence that makes them burst into tears. But they also practice this on their own, at home, just crying on their own, weeping. And I recently lost a friend, for example, and it comes back to me every now and then. I'm in a taxi or I'm in a bus, I just cry. And can this be similar? Can they feel Imam Hussein as their best friend? Could be. Sometimes they say, and they see him as a lover as well.
But also you summarize and you cry.
Also,
Meaning you just
it doesn't have
summarize
to be-
the
yeah.
all moments that are cryable in life
Yes.
for that moment.
Yeah. It could be another trigger that triggers you, and then maybe they're crying for their other issues here. But it is a very cleansing thing. I felt it also after doing it. It's a very cleansing. We all know that even we are like not doing these rituals, cry a little, it's gonna be good for you. It's correct. Something happens in the body when you have tears going out of your ear, not like sweat things, you know. Any more questions, or shall we
See the work?
run the work with sound?
Yeah,
Okay.
perhaps. Thank you so much.
Thank you.